Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Isaac Christopher Lubogo. Listen, have you ever asked yourself whether or not you are actually alive, dead, or living in some kind of mirage? That's the question I ponder. And today, as I begin to dispense something to do with intelligent design and African ontological, epistemological, ontological aesthetics, in terms of understanding the contours of existence, philosophical inquiries into the nature of life and death, that is the question of the day. And whether or not the notion of living is a perpetual state of pretense, as if life is a constant act in terms of what they call echoes of existential themes that create some kind of semblance of reality, and yet we're actually probably not living. These are philosophical dispensations. So the nature of reality and existence has actually been a subject of much debate. And some philosophical schools ponder the concept of illusion, or the question of the very nature of what we perceive as life and death, becoming a complex and even intriguing exploration in terms of our understanding of what we call existence today. So listen, the idea that we actually may be already dead or have actually lived only to die raises questions about the nature of the consciousness in terms of reality. So existentialist thinkers like people like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus explore the absurdity in terms of human existence, suggesting that life lacks inherent meaning. And so from this perspective, the very concept of birth and death might actually be arbitrary constructs in an existence devoid of what they call inherent purpose. So the very question of the notion of living is a perpetual state of pretense, as if life is a constant act in terms of what they call echoes of existential themes. So the existentialist notion of what they call bad faith involves individuals deceiving themselves about the true nature or avoiding the responsibility of what they call authentic living. If life were a continuous current, the question arises, what is the genuine essence of our existence? So mythological perspectives often intertwine with what they call philosophy. People like Plato's allegory of the cup, argue that individuals are likened to prisoners seeing shadows on the wall, which they mistake for reality. So this analogy basically raises doubts about the authenticity of our perceptions in terms of the possibility that we're actually living in a distorted version of reality. Are we together? So ultimately, these philosophical musings challenge our conventional understanding of what life, death, or even reality is actually about. And they prompt us to question the fundamental nature of our existence and the structure that define it, encouraging us to have what they call a deeper exploration of the mysteries that actually surround consciousness and actually aspects of life itself. So the very nature in terms of debate of existence extends to what they call Eastern philosophies as well. So the concepts like Maya in Hinduism and Buddhism suggest that the world we perceive may actually be an illusion. So in terms of obscuring a deeper transcendence of reality, life becomes an illusion, and then birth and death may actually be mere facets of this illusion, leading to a continuous cycle of existence. And that is something that we may want to debate on and think about deeply. So existential nihilism, influenced by thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche, posits that life lacks inherent meaning or value. And in this perspective, birth and death may actually be seen as arbitrary events within the larger framework of a purposeless existence. So the challenge is for us to find or create meaning in a seemingly a different universe. And I'm not debating about the inexistence of God. And that's why we make this argument in terms of intelligent design. So this simulation hypothesis, it becomes a more contemporary idea in terms of purposing our reality, more like a computer-generated simulation. So if this was the case, by the way, then the concepts of birth and death might actually be programmed elements within this simulation in terms of existence, raising questions about the nature of simulations and the purpose behind such simulations. Yeah? So, listen. Now, while these philosophical perspectives offer what they call intriguing possibilities, they also remind us that certain limitations of human understanding, and therefore they create what they call a search for true nature in terms of existence, in terms of an ongoing journey, which with each philosophical perspective providing what they call unique lens through which to examine the profound mysteries of life or death and the very fabric of reality. And those of you who are really deep thinkers would comprehend some of the things that I'm trying to understand in terms of understanding the debate behind what happens after life or what happens in life. So when we contemplate further, we may look at the works of what they call existential phenomenologists like Martin Heidegger, who explored the concept of what they call being in the world. And he actually emphasized that the idea that our existence is inseparable from the experience in terms of the world. In this context, the notions of birth and death become integral parts of our temporal existence, shaping understanding in terms of our well-being. Yeah? And additionally, the philosophy of time obviously plays a crucial role. As I said, existentialist philosophers often grapple with the temporal or the temporality of human existence. So if time is a construct of our consciousness, then the boundaries between birth, life, and death may actually be fluid, challenging the linear perception of our existence itself. Moreover, in terms of existential dread, associations with the awareness of morality, we maybe discuss philosophers like Søren Kierkegaard, who adds another layer to these considerations. And Kierkegaard, for purposes of pronunciation, argues that if life is the constant confrontation with inevitability of death, then the authenticity of our existence is inextricably tied with our ability to confront and make meaning of the face of our mortal morality. Yeah? And that's important for us to comprehend. So in essence, these philosophical perspectives collectively invite us to question not just the nature of life and death, but the very framework through which we interpret these concepts. They actually encourage us in terms of having what they call profound reflection of the subjective nature of reality and the role of consciousness and the intricate interplay between existence and perception. And in terms of the journey of philosophical inquiry into the mysteries of our existence is basically an ongoing exploration, continuously challenging us in terms of reshaping our understanding of what it means to be alive. Please understand, as I go deeper into what they call existential phenomenological argument, I'll argue in terms of what Jean-Paul Sartre, the argument in terms of the concept of bad faith. This guy introduces the idea that individuals often evade the full awareness of their freedom and responsibility by adapting societal roles and conforming to societal expectations. So in this context, the conventional understanding of birth and death could actually be seen as part of the societal script, imposing what they call a predefined narrative of our existence. And if we were to argue that in terms of a more deeper dispensation, we could argue in terms of what they call the philosophy of absurdism, as articulated by your friend Albert Camus, who suggested that the human search for meaning in an inherently meaningless universe creates what they call a fundamental tension. And this perspective challenges us to confront the absurdity of seeking meaning in a world that may not inherently provide for it. So if birth and death are components of this absurd existence, their significance therefore becomes a product of our subjective interpretation. And that's the question that I'm arguing for you today, whether or not we're actually alive, dead, or in a mirage of sorts. So existentialism and phenomenological dispensations also require us to inquire into what they call lived experiences. If you argue, people like Maurice Merleau-Ponty, for instance, explores what they call the intertwining of the body and consciousness. So the argument here is that if our perception of life and death is shaped by our embodied experience, then it raises questions about the authenticity in terms of these concepts beyond our subjective lived reality. Yeah. So in terms of a conclusion or summary, these philosophical threads encourage what they call a nuanced examination of the contracts of birth and death, and they beckon us basically to question not only their objective reality, if such a thing exists, but also the subjective frameworks and societal contracts that influence our understanding of these fundamental aspects of human existence. So the argument here is that the philosophical journey basically continues to evolve or unfold, inviting us, as I said, to reassess, to reinterpret, and ultimately to make meaningful of our existence within the vast tapestry of our philosophical inquiry. Now, I'm going to touch upon the concept of what they call eternal recurrence, a philosophical idea associated with your guy called Friedrich Nietzsche. And he proposed that the notion of our lives and the very detail of his existence might actually occur infinitely. Okay? And if they were true, or if this was true, then the cycle of birth, life, and death would actually be perpetual, challenging us to embrace and affirm each moment as if it were to be lived endlessly. Yes, and if you argue that on a deeper and more detailed perspective, the argument here is that the exploration of personal identity and self, in the words of David Hume or even John Locke, contributes to such a discourse. So if our sense of self is a continuous stream of consciousness rather than a fixed entity, then it raises questions about persistence of the argument of I, through the supposed boundaries of birth and death. Yeah? So please understand that existentialists and absurdist thinkers often grapple with the idea of creating what they call a meaning in a seemingly indifferent universe. And as I said, your guy Albert Camus argues in terms of what they call the concept of revolt against the absurd, and he invites us to rebel against the inherent meaninglessness. Yeah. So in this context, birth could actually be seen as the beginning of a revolt, and death as a culmination, challenging us to find the purpose and the face of an absurd existence. Yeah. Some of you know that movie where one of the protagonists actually says, maybe life, maybe death is another perspective of life. Maybe death is a gift. Yeah, you watch that movie by The Life of David Gale. But the argument I'm proponing here, these diverse philosophical perspectives collectively weave a rich tapestry in terms of ideas that prompt us to question and reflect and continuously reassess our understanding of life and death and the very nature of our existence. So the argument is a debate about the philosophy of life as a journey, becoming a dynamic exploration, and therefore offering what they call myriads of avenues in terms of contemplation and interpretation. And it's important, as in, to explore the concept of existential anxiety, as discussed by thinkers, as I said, like people like Soren Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard, who later became an existentialist, argues in terms of the awareness of our own existence, coupled with the uncertainty in terms of the future and the inevitability of death, which can actually generate a profound existential anxiety. So this anxiety therefore becomes a central aspect in terms of human experience, influencing our perceptions of life and death, and obviously raising the question about the authenticity of our choices and actions in the face of these existential angst. That's why I would argue to watch that movie that I just talked about, because it has very, very strong fundamental principalities in terms of what is the reason behind life and what is the argument in terms of what is the most important. So these philosophical, what they call phenomenological hermeneutics, particularly developed by Martin Heidegger, emphasizes the idea of being thrown into a world. Yeah? And this perspective suggests that our existence is not a product of our choosing, but rather an immersion into a world with what they call pre-existing meanings and interpretation. So birth in its context becomes a moment of being thrown into a world already shaped by cultural, historical, and linguistic frameworks. I have a friend of mine who told his mother that, please do not overstress me, after all, I'm only a product of your excitement with my father. So those are arguments I'm pointing out. But anyway, lastly, the Eastern philosophical concept of what they call impermanence, often found in Buddhism, challenges what they call the permanence of entities, including self. So if our understanding of birth and death is influenced by what they call impermanent nature of all things, then it prompts us into reevaluating the significance that we attribute these events within the broader context of ever-changing or interconnected nature of existence. Yes? And these additional arguments in terms of perspectives help us to further contribute to what you call a rich dispensation in terms of philosophical ideologies surrounding the very nature of life, the very nature of death, and human existence, and questioning whether or not we are actually living life, or perhaps we're in a big dream and which will never end. And when you think someone has died, it's another movie. Someone is born, is another movie. So it gives us lenses through which we can actually explore the complexities and the mysteries of our very being as individuals. So as we argue these points, please understand that I am not making fervent dispensations in terms of people who believe in theology of life after death and stuff like that. But I'm just pondering and aching our brains to think outside the box and throw this box away. Listen, and this is some of the debate that we're making this dispensation of my book here called Intelligent Design and the African Ontological and Epistemological Aesthetics. I make wonderful dispensations in terms of the things that we talk about in this book, and I would like to take the liberty of reading something very small for you here, perhaps, and as a dispensation. The idea is that the intention of the book is to affirm, in my opinion, the existence of an African God, if there's anything like that. The idea is that the God, the maker of the dynamic universe, in this book, I analyze the myth of various African peoples who relate, that after setting the world into motion, the supreme being withdrew and remains remote from the concerns of human life, or better perhaps, set his paradigms in which we call mankind. And therefore, we could only reach him through different metaphors that we call different religions. And I think that's what Dr. Aslan says, the guy who actually wrote that book, Jesus of Nazareth, the Zealot, who was actually a Muslim, who has a PhD in the New Testament and also a master's in the New Testament and an undergrad, in spite of the fact that he's a Muslim. He said, the ideology why I proponed, why I believe in Islam as a vehicle, is not because I have beef, to use that word in quotes, against what, Christianity or any other religion for that purpose, because I find Islam as a better metaphor for me to lead me to the greater truth. When you look at people like your guy who wrote The Grand Design, that gentleman, his argument in terms of dispensation of what the world is, or what the universe is, becomes another question of debate. So it's important for us as we argue these to have a bigger contemplation of these arguments, try to think outside the box and throw the box away. So once again, my name is Isaac Christopher Lubogo, and thank you for your attention. You can find most of our works at lubogo.org or suegenesislawup.com. God bless you, and thank you as we ponder on these words.